So we're good?
Well, how does he know that you're...
So this is what I did last time. And see, now it's recording. All right, so we're here with Chris Johnson, and we're really excited to have you on, Chris. So thanks for coming on, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and we'll go from there. But why don't you just give us a little background into yourself here?
I am a washed-up master's level sportsman who seems to be focusing more on long course racing these days. But no, I'm a physical therapist by training. I do a lot of performance coaching. I dabble with a lot of stuff in the online world, and above all else, I'm just trying to be a resource for people, share some of the things that I've come to appreciate or prioritize at this point in my career as an athlete, as a clinician, as well as a coach. And yeah, just trying to leave your mark. I don't know, I hit 40, I start to get a little bit more philosophical about this stuff. And it's actually my 10-year anniversary with my wife today. So yeah, thank you. Yeah. Not wedding anniversary, since the time since I first duped her into dating me.
Oh, there you go.
Or that it was official.
There you go. We can still celebrate that. That's still a big milestone day.
Yeah, for sure.
So I know you travel a lot. I know you teach a lot, and I know you juggle a lot as well. So for those of you that don't follow Chris online, he's got a really good social media presence, and he's very consistent with the material he puts out there. And I myself, I benefit from following you, and I participate in the Runner Zone. So for our listeners out there that don't know anything about the Runner Zone, do you mind sharing a little bit of the background and then a little bit of the vision as to why you guys created the Runner Zone?
Yeah, of course. The Runner Zone has been such a fun undertaking, and I'm so fortunate to have just two consummate pros that team up with me, Joel Satgast and Nathan Carlson. Joel is at Methodist University. He was actually the last student I took, which is sort of scary because he'll far surpass me from a professional standpoint. And Nathan is at KC Endurance. He's a KC running mate, and he is in Kansas City, Missouri. And again, someone who I've spent some time mentoring, which sounds sort of odd to hear at this point because he's someone else who, I've sort of, I guess, for lack of a better term, given the reins to. And, it's fun to just work with these guys. So the Runner Zone we're actually roughly at about the 3-year anniversary of it. And it was something that was sort of born out of necessity. I put all this content out, as you know, and I don't know why I do it. It's just really a window into me tinkering with exercise. And, I was thinking about this today. I've been tinkering with these exercises literally for 30 years. So I'm 40 at this point, but I started running into issues as a little league baseball pitcher when I was 10 years old. And I got exposed to some of these exercises through a fellow named Steve Hoffman. Some folks in the clinical world may know him, but he had a focus in working with overhead athletes. And I, since that time, I think that was the first point in my life where I started maybe unknowingly gravitating towards physical therapy. I was just fascinated by it because it made such a difference in getting me back to baseball as well as so many other sports over the course of my life. So when I put these videos out, naturally, a lot of them are silent just because there's so much to talk about, and I don't want it to be overwhelming, and I want people to use them. And, if they want some of their patients or clients to be able to put them to use, I want them to be able to plug in their own verbiage. So that's part of the reason. But as I put them out, everyone's like, hey, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? What about X, Y, and Z? And I tried to keep up with the emails and the messages, and it just got to a point where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So, and that's, as the saying goes, if you can't figure out the solution to a problem, make the problem worse. And it just kept getting worse. And then I put together the Runner Zone, and yeah, it's been fun to grow. I don't really market it. It's been a very organic undertaking, and the people who have come on board have been on board for pretty much all 3 years. So I think that gives us validation, and yeah, it's a lot of clinical pearls. It's, sort of like a multimedia platform for folks. And we should really call it the transition zone, because we talk a lot about triathlon. Obviously, you know, we call it the runner zone just so people can wrap their head around it a little bit more. But the reality is, most of the triathletes that we see, it's the run that gets them into trouble, whether they're injured or they have difficulty running off of a bike. So, but anyways, it's fun to have you on board. You've been pretty active over the past 3 years, so hopefully it's had an impact on you.
Yeah, I enjoy sharing, things, slowly, it's such a knowledgeable group that there's a little bit of like, I want to absorb all the information that I can, and just kind of like slowly leak some things out there that I find interesting or that the group I know would enjoy. For example, I posted a short little video of our daughter, 7-year-old daughter, running on the treadmill, wanting feedback, really excited about that. And I just said, looks like you're just having a fun time. It looks like a person running on a treadmill. You're at such a young age, like just enjoy the process of learning to run, that's clinical information that I've learned from the runner zone. Is at the end of the day, you're looking at a human being when you're doing your analysis, and you can't ever forget that. And so that's one thing that I took away from the course. So I took the running skills course that you put on I believe it was last March. It might be coming in a year ago. Yeah, down at you mentioned at Nathan's place at Running Mate KC. And I want to read this because for those of you that are going to watch the video, I got my notes right here from that class. And I keep coming back to one thing that you said at the class. And we'll probably post it, and it's just over and over in my mind, right? This could go anywhere, right? You probably think. But you said,
Yeah, you need to give that to me so we can put it online and sell it.
Well, you actually said it in passing. And what I've gathered, because I've been to a lot of classes, I organize a lot of classes, and you get a lot of information right before the class. You get a lot of information talking in side conversations with the instructor or the people that are there that know the material well. And usually that's at lunch, or that's at in our case, that was at the pub the night before the class. You said this, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget it. And let me just read it to you. You said, you rehab to train, you train to compete, and you compete to redefine your limits. And you said it so fluidly and elegantly that resonated with me, because a lot of times people struggle with that last part, because maybe they're like me, or maybe they're like you, that they get to the point where they're out of an organized team, or they're out of an organized activity, and now it's on them to compete. And so that's kind of where I kind of want to lead into the next thought process or question is, in regards to motivating patients. It's kind of a catch-22. Are we the ones that are going to be motivating patients or clients, if you want to call them that, or tell me a little bit into your background and your training as to questions you would ask a client or a patient to get a little bit more of a window, like you like to say, into redefining their limits. I don't know if I asked that correctly, but just give us a little bit of insight as to your background into motivation.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm like almost tearing up, which sounds really cheesy, and like I have butterflies at the same time, just because I remember exactly where I was when I first wrote that down. And at day's end, you have to understand, especially in the capacity that we work in, the whole return from injury to performance, that spectrum. And I don't think folks really appreciate where a lot of athletes are on that spectrum. And the priorities end up sort of falling by the wayside. So, I think that the goal is, and Claire Ardain and a bunch of other researchers put a great manuscript out in BJSM, I believe it was 2016. And, they define this return to sport spectrum. And, it's return to participation, which, may be occurring at the tail end of rehab. There's likely a few different healthcare professionals or practitioners involved with overseeing the athlete. Then there's return to sport, where you're back to regular practice, and, but you're not sort of necessarily at your pre-injury status. And then there's return to performance, where you're trying to really push the needle, and you're back at your pre-injury status, if not, having progressed. So, in terms of motivation, I mean, I think a lot of the times you have to just sort of understand understand where people are in stages of change. And a lot of people, I think that they start to assume this identity as an athlete, and they may not want to keep competing. I know plenty of people are just like, I'm done, I'm checked out. This was a case a lot with some of my friends who I used to compete in tennis with. They just got burnt out. And, and if you had someone like that come in to see you and you're like, hey, I want to better understand your situation. On one hand, you're here and it seems like you're putting in the time, but you also, seem maybe a little bit distracted, or your heart's not really in it. I want to better understand your situation, because the last thing I want to do is waste your time if this isn't something that's important to you, or figure out what is important and where perhaps this sport plugs into your life. And it sort of forces the athlete, and this is a key principle of motivational interviewing. It's creating this ambivalence and doing it in a very just like, sort of free-flowing organic manner. So I think that if you can create some ambivalence with someone, it will prompt them to take action, or basically get them to go in the right direction in terms of stages of change. Yeah, I think a lot of the times it's just being present with people, really understanding their motivation to train, and where it plugs into their life.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that your class and your resources that you put on outline or online is, they're really valuable clinically. And you were one of the first people that opened my eyes into this whole realm of motivational interviewing. And so, anytime you wrote something, and you cited a reference of a text or anything like that, like I went out and I had to buy that book, and that, slowly, absorbing that information. And I would say I'm definitely a novice when it comes to applying some of the motivational interviewing techniques and strategies, again, to facilitate some change with patients and clients. So for that resource, I can't thank you enough for that, because we're already utilizing that in our clinic here, and using it in some of the other avenues that we try, because we put on our own classes and we put on some of the other events, trying to stimulate actually change like within professions. So we're recognizing, as a chiropractor, the educational system is great. It teaches you how to be a doctor, for example, but there are other avenues that we see that there's some holes in that bucket. And so motivational interviewing is one of those plugs into the leaky bucket that helps you apply that clinically. So I recognize there was zero motivational interviewing in my training. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's just
same goes for me.
You had to go through it. You had to learn, well, my interview skills are good, but they're not great. How do I get them to the next level? So your motivational interviewing resources, to me, were invaluable. And so what are some, just to give some of the listeners an example, what are some of the questions that you typically ask on an intake with someone? Let's just say they have a shoulder injury and they have some fear of moving through the shoulder, and they're also a triathlete. I know I just kind of painted a broad stroke there, but just to give them a little example.
Well, I'll give you a great example, and I'm going to spin it a little bit here. I have a fellow who's coming to see me in follow-up after we get off this call, and he was a very high-level rower, D1, top-notch program. I mean, probably at day's end, has Olympic caliber physiology, and he's taken up cycling, and he has a big engine on the bike too, and he was dealing with some right knee pain, and he called me yesterday. He said, "Hey, look, now my left knee's bothering me." I said, "Well, hey, did you crash?" And this starts to get into questioning, and you're already helping him reconceptualize the situation. I said, "Hey, I'm around tomorrow. I'll gladly connect with you. Is everything okay? Did you sustain a crash?" And he said, "No." I said, "Oh, that's great. That automatically puts you on the other side of the fence. So yeah, let's figure out a time to connect." So when I see him today, obviously go through the motions of greeting him and whatnot, and just say, "What do you think's going on? I want to better understand what your thought process is on this, because you've gone through a bunch of fits. We've already ruled out that there hasn't been any trauma. There was no knee swelling in either knee last time I saw him." And you sort of put it back on them and say, "What do you think's going on? Why do you think you're running into these issues?" And I have my ideas why. I know he's plugged into doing some really hard group rides. And, but I need to have him come up with a possible explanation. And then from there, the conversation starts to unfold. Now, the flip side of the coin is you have to be proficient with orthopedic examination and functional assessments, because you have to examine his knee, and I don't expect to find anything remarkable, just because there wasn't trauma. His examination was pretty unremarkable the first time I saw him. So it sounds like a patellofemoral situation, as we know, people call that the black hole of orthopedics, but I think he probably committed a training error, and it's just figuring out, okay, what are the best next steps? We obviously want to keep him on the bike. But again, I think it's very important that as practitioners, and I think this is one of the challenges with motivational interviewing and being present with people, is I think we almost go through training and we're trained to do things to people. And I just don't feel the need whatsoever. I mean, he may get that much more out of just sitting down, having a conversation and saying, hey, let's keep you on the bike. I don't see anything that concerns me. And, here are a couple things that we could do to address, some low hanging fruit, which may take the form of some strengthening drills. But I try to really engage and have people own their situation and embrace the reality of their situation, and let them know that, hey, I'm in your corner, but you're the one going in for the fight. And I put that image up in the talk where it shows a corner of a boxing ring with like a towel, a stool, some water. That's a role that I feel like we fulfill as rehab professionals. So that's why I go crazy when people start talking about a lot of these modalities and get into arguments. I'm just like, oh, this is sandbox stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Obviously, I'm partial to like your vision of what your type of treatments and your assessments and your clinical decision making. I'm partial to that way of thinking, because if you think any other way, in my opinion, you're making something appear to be too simplistic, for the sake of potentially, I don't know, comfort, convenience, combination of the two. And so I'm more than willing to step out of my comfort zone to ask these thought-provoking questions respectfully and not crossing boundaries or anything like that, but to just get to know them, because 9 times out of 10, there hasn't been a provider in the area that have asked them. And this is a question that you said at the class. You said we had a sample runner come in and we're going through some things, and she was explaining a little bit of her issues. I think she had a hamstring issue, and you just said, well, what do you think is wrong? And there was a long pause. And then she realized, well, like, I don't know, like nobody's ever like asked me that. And that was like, a perfect example of, okay, we can actually, as providers, we can actually pause, like take a breath and say, well, Nancy, why don't you tell me what you think is going on? And then just sit back, have your cup of tea, and enjoy the process of getting to know this person.
Yeah. And, the other thing that we talked about too is, people were more convinced by what they hear themselves saying, so that's, let me just kill my phone. That's very important, so if you keep hearing yourself echo a certain theme or phrase, it's like that starts to become sticky. So yeah, again, that's another motivational interviewing tenet. I think a lot of this is, call it motivational, call it whatever you want. It's being present with people, having a candid conversation, applying the skills that you have, to help that person. But I think that garbage in, garbage out. If you're not getting all the information, and you're not getting accurate and relevant information, you shouldn't jump into trying to start treating that person right off the bat. Another great example, I had a woman that came to see me a couple weeks ago, and she was referred by someone in Ohio, and and I said, well, what do you think's going on? I actually wrote this down. So she said that I have sacroiliac joint dysfunction, and I was working with this fellow, and he was the only person that was able to realign it and was able to give me this very specific set of exercises to help keep it stabilized. And he also is the only person that knew how to do this special technique to put it back into place. And, can you do this? That was the initial phone call. And now you can't just be like, well, hey, here's the reality of the situation. I said, well, yeah, you know, same, let's establish a thread, because I want to, it sounds like you had a great experience working with him, and he was one of the few people that had a positive impact on your situation. So I want to get a window into what, what his thoughts are and his impression was. Now, again, 10 years ago, I may have said like, hey, this is a contentious topic. People don't even believe sacroiliac joint dysfunction exists. Nothing's getting stabilized, but you just let people verbalize this. You get more information. And then she tells me towards the end of the session, as we're just talking, I said, hey, how'd you land yourself in Seattle? And she said, well, I'd moved out here with my boyfriend, and we've since split. And I'm like, boom, there's your line, right? I can't imagine following someone to the other end of the country, who I was in a relationship with for 10 years. And then all of a sudden exiting that relationship, you're in a new part of the world, totally different culture. You may have made a lot of sacrifices and opened up a new chapter in your life, and like talk about, a lot of moving parts. That's got to create distress on someone's system, So again, you have to get at this information, because if you jump into treating, not to say that, you can't do some good to help people, but it's these, nuggets or tidbits of information that you need to keep accruing over the course of your work with someone. I don't expect to get it all during the first session, but it's just an open and ongoing conversation, and you just want to try and give them an open arena or platform to be able to convey that stuff to you.
Yeah, I appreciate the history there, where you said like the 10 years ago self, version of yourself. Like what would you have done back then? Because I just turned 30, so I'm 10 years. You got 10 years on me then, so I find myself
nothing to be proud of for me. Yeah.
But it's that sort of mindset that I have to check every single day, where using your clinical experience, learning some others' the other clinical experiences of mentors that I've had, really, really have manifested themselves in this, like, resist that temptation to just go out there and just rock someone's world because they had an intervention that they saw results with. So then for you to just come in and disrupt that, you're immediately, I don't care what anyone says, how good your own techniques are, how good your own services are. You're going up against a barrier, and that entry point into providing some healing and providing some of that processing. They already got one foot out the door.
Yeah, and people talk about this as coming alongside folks. It's sort of, I don't know if this is a great analogy. It's like, if I'm out on my bike or out on a run, and I see someone in front of me, I may catch up if we're both riding solo or running solo, and just come up and say, hey, what's going on? How's your run going? And that's sort of what I feel like I do as a clinician. It's like, they come in to see you and you're like, hey, what's going on? You want a coffee? You okay on water? Can I get you a towel? Here's the restroom. It's just creating this really specific environment so they feel comfortable, and that way they're going to start providing you with probably more meaningful information that's going to directly impact your clinical decision making.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned that previously. Those non-specific effects are really a significant driver, and that's something that was new to me. It was something that I'm sure we had had in the background, but to see it applied clinically day in and day out with some of the patients and clients that you see, and Nathan and Joel. I mean, the three of you guys are really fun to be engaged with and just participate online with. So for our listeners, get in touch with these guys, and we'll provide some information on how we can keep track of you and some of the other guys that we've mentioned. But a couple other questions that I want to finish with here, because I told you we'll keep it short, we'll keep it sweet, and we'll get a lot of information out. And one thing I wanted to just discuss with you, Chris, is if you would be open and you'd be willing to describe a situation. It could be a case, or it could be a particular person that was a direct reporter to you, or someone that that you hired or you employed, where you failed in the leadership realm. Because we do lead patients, and so it could be a patient interaction. Describe something that you failed at and how the learning process took place.
Oh, that's a great question. My mind's sort of racing right now. I think if you're talking about, and right now I should preface this by saying, like, from a clinical standpoint, I'm a one man operation in terms of like rendering physical therapy. With coaching, that's a little bit of a different ball game. I'm just going to speak sort of in generalities, because I don't have a specific case that really pops out right now, aside from like way back when I used to teach tennis and had a staff of people at one of the local clubs in Pittsburgh. But I think the main thing is, yeah, I've been reading a lot of Simon Sinek's work and a few other authors. And, I think that from a leadership standpoint that, thankfully we're getting away from this hierarchy. All right. Someone who I think is just marvelous that we'll start to hear a little bit more from in the rehab world is Michael Risk. And he runs iMove down in Australia. I think they're in Melbourne. He's someone who, he's very supportive. He's a resource for all of his employees. He doesn't prop himself up on a pedestal. He sort of follows that whole, notion of leaders eat last. And I think the other thing too is to challenge your employees. So again, if someone comes to you, similar to a patient, if they come in, they're like, hey, I have a question about X, Y, and Z, I think you're doing a grave disservice to that person if you give them the answer and say, well, hey, and I would just make this a, automatic deal to say, hey, before you come and ask me a question, I want you to bring your solution. Tell me what your problem is, and tell me how you've approached this, looking at it from a 360-degree lens. And then I'll be in a better position to help troubleshoot with you, right? So again, it's very similar to clinical care in that regard. But I think that you also have to find out what the values are of your employees, or if you're in a leadership role, because people have very different values, and you want to understand them, because that way you're going to be able to best work with them. Or if you have to manage a team, to basically address their needs and their wants. So I don't know if that really answers your question.
Yeah, it does, because it's that there are many different principles to leadership, and I think that it's almost, in a sense, also the preparedness principle, where you're not just gonna like walk into a scenario and expect it to just happen, naturally the way that you want it to go. Like, you have to prepare. The military doesn't just walk into a battlefield and decide the plan as they go. They prepare and train and practice and prepare. And then when someone has questions in the military, it's like, okay, we all can troubleshoot this together. But I like what you said, in that if we can treat our employees similarly to how we treat patients, then they can start coming to these conclusions, not necessarily on their own, but they can formulate thought processes that carry the company vision, forward. And so I like how you put that. That was very, very well put. Have you been in a leadership role? I know you have a research background. Did you have a team in the research background that you had, where you had several plates that you were juggling and multiple things going on, where you learned, wow, there's a lot to this whole leadership thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've worn a bunch of different leadership caps. Some I felt like I did a better job with than others. But I played collegiate tennis. I was a captain of our team. I'm basically in a leadership role right now, in terms of, which again sounds funny to say, but with Joel and Nathan, in terms of the runner zone. I mean, I guess sort of acting in a directorship capacity. And again, it's just sort of like huddling up, saying like, let's all huddle up and figure out like, how do we advance the ball down the field. Sometimes you're going to get into disagreements or have different perspectives on things, but again, it's about engaging, communicating, having transparency, and not creating this hierarchy. Another example that, to come back to your last question, when I came out to Seattle, I had to take a job with a clinic out here, just so it didn't raise a red flag to the banks to get a house. So they look at us like we have some sort of security. that's another mirage. But, you know, the powers that be at this facility, they had their offices and they were basically removed from the clinic. And this is a big operation. And generally, there was, you know, I'll tell you what, if I was running a clinic, I would not have a private office. And if I did, I sure as hell would have that door wide open and I would have a red carpet leading up to it, because I never want people to feel like they would be bothering me. It's just open door policy, you know. And I think that that's something that, you know, you have to be a really selfless person if you're going to be a good leader, but you also have to trust your instinct too, and sometimes make some executive decisions if you think it's for the greater good.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up your PT clinic experience out there in Seattle. And so what made you decide that you're going to kind of go against the grain in regards to the traditional PT setup? So you're in a little bit of a unique facility. So explain to our listeners a little bit about, is it Métier? Is that how you say it? Métier?
Yeah, and right now I have privileges at Métier where if I want to go up and sync up with someone, we have a daylight basement in our residence, so we turn the whole downstairs. I'm sitting in my office right now. If I walk out the door, we have a performance space, so squat rack, treadmill, Peloton, you know, dumbbell rack, trap bar. I have a Wahoo kicker, so it creates a very intimate environment. People come to see me, and we work one-on-one. So I work largely in a consulting capacity these days. You know, I may see people for a couple follow-up visits, but, you know, the reality is with most endurance athletes, unless they have, you know, really, you know, complicated case involving a bone stress injury or, you know, perhaps a, you know, pretty challenging tendon disorder, I just don't feel the need that you need to see an endurance athlete more than 2 to 3 visits, unless they've really gone south. Just because they're generally these non-traumatic soft tissue overuse injuries that respond really well to a progressive loading program, provided that you hit the entry point. You know, again, I don't want to say hit it with a bullseye, but come close, right? So.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because it's always interesting to find, you know, where like-minded individuals, where they practice, how they practice, what capacity they're in. So when you first moved to Seattle, because you came from, was it New York City? Is that where you came from?
Correct.
Yeah. So that was a transition going across the country, you know, from New York City to Seattle. But then that kind of is like a journey, you know, it's a process that you've gone through there that has led you to this point now. So then where do you see your career headed now? Is it more online with some of the distance coaching that you're doing and the mentorship that you're doing? So just where do you see yourself going in the next couple of years?
Our mission is to elevate the standard of care for endurance athletes, because we feel that it hasn't changed, and it's almost, I don't want to say going backwards, but it's stagnated. And now I think that folks are overwhelmed with all of the research, and, you know, look, these endurance sports have a very predictable set of performance demands that we should be able to prepare an athlete or individual for. But the challenge is to understand, you know, who the person is, because if you don't understand who the person is, their ecosystem and motivation to train, well, how are you going to program for that individual? So, you know, again, our goal is to basically just be an unparalleled resource, to take a science-based framework and to elevate the standard of care for coaches, well, for endurance athletes, but to really educate coaches, clinicians, and athletes themselves, because we feel that's really our role at this point, and not our role, it's our responsibility. All right. So.
Awesome. Love that. So that kind of wraps up some of the questions that I have for you. Where can some of our listeners find more information about you?
The easiest thing to do is, so I have, I'm just about to rework, or I'm almost finished reworking my ZerenPT.com website. You can go to chrisjohnsonpt.com. That discusses a runner zone. Some of the digital resources that we have out, the treadmill analysis guide are on there. The Running on Resistance digital text, which is like basically 1,000 hours of work that we basically released in the early part of, actually we released it in the fall of 2018. And then if you're on Instagram, I try to just litter Instagram with a lot of exercises and just tinkering and exploring movement. So I'm at ZerenPT.com. Actually, at ZerenPT. I'm not on Twitter. I only have so much bandwidth.
Well, I love those videos because you can almost see your clinical processing in each video. Like as you're toying with something and you post it, and then something comes up with a variation and you post it, and you're right, they're short. They're just a few seconds long, and I know I start to ask questions when I see the videos, and so I've learned a lot. And I love that you just leave it open-ended. Like, here's a video, take it for what it's worth, use it as you see clinically fit. I think it's been, even your videos on Instagram alone have been tremendously helpful. And for those of you that are watching, that are going to see the film, I've got a printed out copy here. Of
you printed it, yeah.
Is that okay? That violate?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, printed it. Always, scroll through it, and you got your, the treadmill running analysis and gait retraining, which I have found invaluable in regards to evaluating runners and triathletes, and also, which we haven't really talked about, is the endurance hybrid sports such as lacrosse, soccer, that sort of thing. And I use the principles that you discuss in this treadmill analysis, and I look for the same things because it's a person, and while their goals might be a little bit different, but there's still some really good clinical information. So I can't emphasize this enough, and so we'll try to send as many people over to your website to make sure they can get their copy of this. In regards to you and the wonderful products that you have, do you have any other resources that you recommend for people? Like, there's this one book that it must be on your shelf at the office.
Well, I want to say one other thing, and then I'll comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
As I'm staring at my library, people always ask me this question. I need to be better prepared for it. Nathan, I also have the Runner Zone podcast, and that's been fun. And, people have given us some really great feedback. So if you have questions, I'm going to have a form that folks can, request that we cover a certain topic. In terms of that one book or resource, I don't know, man. I always tell clinicians, like Louis Gifford's Aches and Pains, I feel like that just gets recycled so much, so a lot of times people have, some great ideas, and then I read Louis Gifford. I'm like, oh, well, that's where they got it from. And Louis may have gotten it from someone else.
Right.
I think, I don't know if I have that one book that that really changed something for me. I think there's a few books. So yeah, I don't know. I feel lame not coming up with a.
That's okay. Think about it, and then when we have you on the podcast next, we'll start off. Episode 2 with you. We'll have you kind of come back on and share a little bit of insight into books that you recommend. How does that sound?
It sounds great. Hey, I'll tell you what I'm listening to right now is Atomic Habits.
Okay.
And I think the fellow's name, I'll tell you really quick. Let's see. It's James. I want to say Clear or Clean. Bear with me one second. James Clear.
James Clear. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that the reason I think this is helpful, irrespective of what you do for a living or what your values are. But like one of the things that really resonated with me, it sounds crazy. I don't write goals for patients. A goal is this dichotomous, and it's like you either reach your goal or you fail. And once you reach it, so what? So I really try to, with a lot of these folks that reach out to me for my professional services, is to help them create an environment to basically surround themselves with the right people, to put the right systems in place, and from there things take over. So it's like when we had our children enter our life, and it started a family. I don't have the luxury to go drive to the pool, go ride for 4 hours. So what do? Well, we took the downstairs and turned it into a performance space. And hey, you know what? Now I can actually see people here and create this really great environment. And hey, you know what? My kids actually get to come down and hang out and basically get a window into a healthy habit that we have that they're likely to adopt. And it also encourages them to move in sort of a safe environment, so long as they don't get too close to the squat rack or the bike when it's moving. So yeah, it's just create these environments, surround yourself with the right people. And, in a lot of these habits, autopilot in a good way.
Yeah. Well, Chris, as a colleague and a friend, I can't thank you enough for setting some time aside and putting this podcast together. Thanks for the wisdom, the insights that you shared with us today. We'll get you on again for sure. And I look forward to hearing more of you and Nathan and Joel on the Runner Zone podcast. And I really appreciate your time. Best of luck with everything you got moving forward. And any final comments for our listeners?
I just want to thank everyone who has supported us over time, who has challenged us, who has called us out on things. But again, we're part of a much bigger community, and it's just fun to have folks like yourself who I respect reach out, and also to cross party lines. I think that there's definitely a top tier of clinician that's out there, and they're into seeking truths, and they don't get hung up on what initials are next to someone's name. And like any field, there's brilliant people, and there are people who make you concerned that you're in the same profession. So I just want to thank everyone.
You can sit in a sandbox with anybody at any time for any reason and get along just fine. And I don't really. Yeah. Well, Chris.
Yeah. Well, that was me. That was influenced by me being in New York City when I would ask a patient like, "Hey, how's your day going?" They're like, "Hey, great. I just came from someone walking on my back in Chinatown," and I'm like, "Okay." Well, I'm not going to put my hands on you today because you're going to tell me that you have this profound soreness, and then you're going to get me tangled up in that web. So yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. No. I love it. I really do. Well, again, thank you for your time, Chris. We'll be in touch, and we'll make sure we include all those resources you mentioned in the show notes. And I appreciate your time again, Chris. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Regards to your family.
Same to you.